Welcome to lesson 5 of my Python series, Functions. Functions can also be defined by the programmer. A function's parameter is a variable listed inside the parentheses in its definition, and an argument is a value that is sent to the function when it is called. The return keyword exits a function and returns one or more values. These return values can be stored in variables, but not required in a function. Exercise 1. Write a function that accepts two numbers and returns their sum. So to this, we'll just say define, and then we'll return the sum. So let's just say sum of 2. And this is accepting two numbers, so two parameters. So we'll just say num1 and num2. So these are the variables for these parameters, and we can use them inside the function. So here, as you can see, we're indenting, and we can just return the sum, so num1 plus num2. And that should be all we need. So if we print sum of 2, let's just do 1 and 2, we get 3. And notice that we have to print the result because this returns the value, but it doesn't display it. In order to display the return result, we have to print it. Write a function that accepts two numbers and returns a string saying which one is greater. So similarly, we're accepting two numbers, so we'll just say define, and I'll just call it compare, num1 and num2. And we have to use if statement now to check which one is greater. So if num1 is greater than num2, we'll return, we use an f string, num1 is greater than num2. And then else, and we're assuming that the numbers are different, we'll return num2 is greater than num1. So if we print the result of using the compare function on, let's do 1 and 2 again, we get that 2 is greater than 1. Write a function that accepts a list of numbers and returns their sum. So I'll just call this function sum of list, and that'll just take in one parameter. And we'll loop through this list, so for num in list, and we need a total to keep track of the sum. We'll add that num to the total, and then after the for loop, we'll just return the total. So if we print sum of list on a list, we get 17. Write a function that accepts a list of numbers and returns a list of only the even numbers. So here, we're getting a list of numbers again. I'll just call it get evens, and it'll accept a list. Remember that you can name this anything, but I'm just choosing to name it list. And we need to get only the even numbers. So we'll loop through this again, and we'll also make an evens list. Instead it's empty. So we'll loop through this for num in list. And we have to check if it's even. If num mod 2 equals 0, then we'll append that to the evens list. After the for loop, we'll just return the evens list. So let's print the result of get evens on a list. So we get only the even numbers. Write a function that accepts a list and returns its length. So we're basically creating our own length function. I'll just call it length, and it'll accept a list again. And we can just make a variable for the amount. So we'll just set it to 0, and then loop through the list for item in list. And then we'll just add 1 to the length, and then we'll return the length. So let's print the length of a list. I'll just put in a bunch of different values. And we get 4. Write a function that accepts a list and returns the length of only its unique elements. So we're accepting just a list again. And let's make a new list for the uniques, so unique elements. That'll be empty. And then we'll loop through the list. for item in list. And then we're only going to add if it's not in the unique elements list yet. So if item not in unique elements dot append item, and then we'll just return that list. So let's call print return unique, and I'll put in some repeated elements and some non-repeated elements, and let's see what happens. So you get each element only once, even though there are duplicates in here. Write a function that returns the index position of the first occurrence of a specified item in a list, and a separate function to create a randomized list of numbers to test it on. So let's call this getIndex, and for this we need two parameters, the list and the item we're looking for. And for this we'll actually use a while loop because we're getting the index. So we'll start that at 0, and while the index is less than the length of the list, we'll check if the item is equal to whatever item is at the index of the list. And if it is, we'll return the index. And every time this loop runs, we want to increment index, so plus equals 1. And then if we don't find anything, we'll return -1. So note that we don't need any special else statement or anything. This will return if this never occurs. Because if this is returned, then it exits the function anyway. Now let's create a function that creates a randomized list of numbers to test it on. So we'll say define generate random list. And for this, we'll take 3 parameters: the length of the list, the minimum, and the maximum. So this is going to be the range of the random numbers. First, let's import the random function from random, import random. Now we'll use the loop, so for num, for I, in range length. And we'll generate a random number, so random num equals randint between the min and the max. And then we'll need to append it to a list, so random list. We'll just say random list dot append random num. And after that, we'll just return the random list. So first, let's test the random list function. We'll say list equals generate random list. We'll have it length 10, minimum 1, and maximum 20. And now let's try to get index on this. So first we'll print that list so we can see. And now let's try to get the index. Let's look for the number 3. So we'll pass in the list and then number 3. So we get this list of random numbers, and we get -1 because 3 isn't in there. So let me try decreasing the range just so we're more likely to get it. So you get that it appears at index 0. Now it's index 4. And note that it shows the first occurrence because we return and exit the function. Write a function that takes in text and a shift amount and shifts each letter left or right by that amount and returns the resulting encoded text. So this is called a Caesar cipher. And a helpful function for this, list.index item returns the index position of the first occurrence of that item. So we have an alphabet list here just to get the letters. So I'll just call this Caesar. And we need the start text, which is before it's encoded, how much we want to shift by, and the direction we want to shift by. So first, let's just make a string for the end text, and that'll just start off as empty. And we'll be appending to this string later on. So first, let's use the cipher direction to adjust the shift amount to be positive or negative. So if cipher direction equals left, then we'll shift by -1. And that's all we need to do. So now let's loop through the start text for letter in the start text. We need to first check if it's in the alphabet so that we can shift it. So if letter in alphabet, otherwise we just won't do anything to it. Now we'll get the new index. So index. First, let's get the index of the letter. And now let's get the new index. So shifted index is going to be that index plus the shift amount. We can check if that index surpasses the length of this list. So if shifted index is greater than 25, then we just subtract 26. So for example, if we went past Z, that would be index 26. It would subtract that and go to index 0, which is A. Now we'll get the shifted letter, so that'll just be whatever letter is at the shifted index in the alphabet. And then after that, we'll just concatenate it to the end text. If it's not in the alphabet, then we'll just append the normal letter to the end text. After that, we're done, so we'll just return the end text. Now we'll just get some input. So text, we'll get the start text. And we'll just convert it to lower. Let's get the shift amount. So we'll convert it to integer. Because it's an integer, input the shift amount. And then the direction. Input left or right. All that really matters is if they do left or not. So now let's just call the function. So we'll call Caesar on text, shift, and direction. I'll just do the click brown fox, which jumps over the lazy dot because that's every letter. We'll shift by 3 to the right. So I get this funky looking code here. Notice how this works. So let's look at lazy. So that'll be right here. We have Z and we're shifting by 3. So it goes back to A and then B and then C. So we end up with C. So everything here is shifted 3 to the right. A variable is only available from inside the region it's created. This is called scope. A variable created inside a function belongs to the local scope of that function and can only be used inside that function. A variable created in the main body of the Python code is a global variable and belongs to the global scope. Global variables are available from within any scope, global and local. If you operate with the same variable name inside and outside of a function, Python will treat them as two separate variables, one available in the global scope, outside of the function, and one available in the local scope, inside of the function. The global keyword is used to create or modify a global variable within a local scope. We can assign the values of multiple variables at once. So for example, we can say x, y equals 100, 200. And we can also switch the values by saying x, y equals y, x. Similarly, we can return multiple values and assign them to different variables. So here we're returning 100, 200 and setting that equal to xy when we call the function. Write a function that returns both the product and quotient of two numbers. Let's call this product and a quotient, and we'll take num1 and num2. So the product will just be num1 times num2. But the quotient is a little trickier because if num2 is 0, and that will produce an error because that will be undefined. So we need to prevent that. To that, we'll use an if statement. So if num2 equals 0, the quotient will just say undefined. Else, the quotient will just be num1 divided by num2. Then we'll just return the product and quotient. So let's set p, q, to equal product and quotient on 10 and 5. And then let's print p and q. So we get 50 and 2. Let's just try replacing the 5 with a 0. We get 0 undefined. A function can be called within another function. Modify the previous program to utilize a multiply function and a divide function within the main function. Let's just create these two functions. So define multiply num1, num2. This one will just return x num1 times num2, and then define divide. I will just copy paste this because it's the same, except instead of setting quotient, we're just going to return it. So now let's replace this with multiply num1, num2, and then we'll set quotient to divide num1, num2. If we run this, we get the correct answer. Write a function that accepts a list of numbers and returns a list of the even numbers and a list of the odd numbers. Use a function within the main function to check whether each number is even. First, let's just create the function to check if the number is even. So define is even. This will just take a num. And we'll just return the result of a boolean. So return num mod 2 equals 0. Now let's create a function for the even and odd lists. So even and odd, and we'll just get a list. We'll make a list for the evens and a list for the odds. Now we'll just loop through the list. So for num list, if is even num, then we'll append it to evens. And then else, we'll just append it to odds. And then we'll just return evens and odds. Let's say eve O equals evens and odds. And we'll just make a list. And we'll print them. So we get the list of the evens and then the list of the odds. That concludes this lesson. I'll leave all of the solutions in the description.